Hello and welcome to Wingin It. Today we're going to be taking a look at the predator powers from Wingspan Asia. Now I get a lot of comments and questions on these birds whenever they come up in one of my games in these videos, so I thought it was well worth taking a look through each of these powers in their own separate video. I'm going to be explaining how they work, looking at what the best strategy is in each case for maximizing point gain, and then ultimately which ones are the best to play. To help with this, I'll be using data from the Power Probabilities reference, which is a very helpful document put together by Travis, aka Tawny Frogmouth. It contains probabilities and expected values for all Wingspan powers, which include some element of random chance. Huge thanks of course to Travis for all of the efforts in pulling that information together, and if you'd like to take a closer look through this document, I've linked the entry on BoardGameGeek in the video description below. Let's start by taking a look at each of the birds in turn. In total there are 13 new predator powers included in Wingspan Asia. We've got the Brahminy Kite, Eurasian Eagle Owl, Eurasian Kestrel, Eurasian Marsh-Harrier, Forest Owlet, Great Cormorant, Oriental Bay Owl, Philippine Eagle, Purple Heron, Rhinoceros Auklet, Sri-Lanka Frogmouth, Stork-billed Kingfisher, and finally white-throated Kingfisher. Now there are a few common themes between these powers, whether it's rolling dice or looking at cards from the deck, but not all of them behave in exactly the same way. So let's break things down a little bit further and take a look at a few different groupings of similar power types, starting with what I think are the simplest, the roll and cash 1 powers. First up in this group we've got the Eurasian Kestrel and the Stork-billed Kingfisher. Now these feel very similar to the dice rolling predator powers from the base game, except in these cases you have a little bit more control over the number of dice you're rolling. So rather than just taking all that are outside of the bird feeder, as you would have done in the base game, you're going to be taking a different number depending on the power. So in the case of the Kestrel, it's just going to be 3 dice every single time, and that comes with a probability of success of 0.421. For the Kingfisher, you get to roll a single dice once for each of your wetland birds, with probability of success ranging from 0.166 for just 1 roll up to a maximum of 0.598 for 5 rolls. So not especially great in either case. Most of the time, these powers are not going to really provide any sort of return when activated. Also in this group is the slightly more complicated Great Cormorant. Now this bird in particular is one that I see a lot of players getting confused on, with the slightly longer power wording being separated into 2 sections, potentially tripping people up. But at its core, the power is very simple. You're just rolling 2 dice, you're looking for fish, and that has probability of success of 0.306. The only addition to this power is that on a future turn, you can choose to take a previously cached fish into your own food supply. That is, if you're lucky enough to have hit that low probability on a previous turn. Next up are a couple of birds which have another twist on this dice rolling power, those being the Rhinoceros Auklet and the Sri-Lanka Frogmouth. This time they come with an additional option where after performing the hunt, all players can then choose to discard a card to gain some type of food from the supply. Now it's worth noting that these 2 parts of the power, rolling the dice to get the cash and then discarding card to get a food, must both be activated if the power is used. You can't choose to activate one part of the power and skip the other. Similarly, the ability to discard cards for food is not tied to the success of the hunt, so all players will get that option regardless of whether the hunt succeeds or fails. Looking at the probabilities now, the Auklet stands at a 0.306 probability of success and the Frogmouth 0.333. So again, neither particularly high. These are going to miss most of the time and not deliver any kind of benefit on the hunt. The final set of dice rolling brown powers are a little bit more exciting. These are the push your luck style dice rolling predator powers. Here we've got the Brahminy Kite, Forest Owlet, Purple Heron and white-throated Kingfisher. In each case here you are choosing some number of dice, then rolling them up to 3 times, cashing up to 1 food for each roll. You can choose to stop after 1 or 2 rolls and keep any of the food that you've successfully cached, or push your luck and keep on going for more, risking the possibility of having to discard any food that you've cached that turn if the next roll fails. Now there are some things worth remembering about these powers. First of all, you could choose any dice, whether it's inside or outside of the bird feeder. This also applies to the previous dice rolling powers that we've already looked at. Next, you cache at most 1 food per roll. So even if you roll more than 1 of the required food type, you're only going to be caching 1 for that particular roll. And lastly, if a roll fails, you only discard either the 1 or 2 food you've already cached on that specific turn. Any food that you cache from a previous turn is always going to remain safe. Now, because with these powers, you get that element of choice each time you roll. Do you keep going and push your luck, or do you stop and cache what you've already gained? It brings a big question. What is the best strategy? Should you stop at 1 cache, or maybe 2 caches? Or do you go for 3 every single time? Is it going to be situational? Does it depend on the game state that you're in? Or is there a single best strategy to follow every time? To answer these questions, we need to take a look once again at the probabilities. For the Brahminy Kite, we're rolling 3 dice looking for fish or rats. And on a single roll of that, we have a probability of success of 0.704. Now, this applies for every roll, regardless of any success from the prior rolls. So, looking at probabilities for 2 and 3 rolls, we can just multiply that probability by itself that number of times. In the case of 2 rolls, giving probability of success at 0.495, and for 3 rolls, 0.348. So, as expected, the probability of hitting 3 times in a row is lower than just 1 or 2. But what we've got to remember is that the return is also higher. You're gaining 3 caches in that slightly lower probability chance of hitting 3 times. So when working out the best strategy, we need to take that into account. And rather than just looking at the probability of success, instead consider the expected value of each outcome. Now, this is just the probability of success multiplied by the points gained. So for 1 roll, multiplying it by 1 is just going to give the same expected value that we had for the probability of 0.704. However, for 2 and 3 rolls, because we're multiplying by larger numbers, we're now going to get bigger expected values. In the case of 2 rolls, 0.990, and in the case of 3 rolls, 1.045. What does this mean? Well, the key takeaway is the expected value goes up with each roll, peaking at that 1.045 expected value after 3 rolls. So the best strategy in order to maximize the expected value from this brown power is to always roll 3 times. And on average, you're going to be scoring over 1 point per turn following this strategy. Even if you've already got 2 caches after 2 rolls, it is worth the risk of losing those 2 points for the potential upside of ending on 3 instead. We can take a similar approach looking at the next 2 birds, the forest owlet and purple heron. Now these have very similar powers, this time rolling just 2 dice, but again going up to 3 times. And in the case of the forest owlet, we're looking for worms and rats. For the purple heron, looking for worms and fish. Now, since fish and rats have the same probability of being rolled, these 2 birds are going to have the same probabilities and expected values. So we can look at them together, since the numbers are going to be the same in each case. A single roll of 2 dice here has a probability of success of 0.750. And as before, multiplying this through for 2 and 3 rolls gives probabilities of 0.563 and 0.422 respectively. Again, in order to get the expected values, we multiply through by the point return in each case, giving final expected values of 0.750, 1.125 and 1.266. Again, as before, the expected value goes up with each additional roll. So we know that the best strategy is going to be to roll 3 times every single time if we want to maximize the expected point return. And we know that on average, we're going to be scoring well over 1 point per turn. It's worth noting as well that the peak expected value of 1.266 here is the highest of any brown predator power, making these 2 of the best hunters in all of Wingspan. Next up, we've got the white-throated Kingfisher. This time just rolling 1 dice. However, any 1 of 3 food is going to count as success. We've got worms, fish, or rats. This gives a probability of success at 0.667. As before, we follow the same process of multiplying through and multiplying by the point returns in each case, and we get an expected value after 2 rolls of 0.889, and after 3 rolls of 0.889 as well. So actually, the there's no difference on average between rolling 2 or 3 times here. The potential gain of that extra point that you would get from that third roll is exactly offset by the potential loss of the 2 caches already gained. What this tells us is that you should probably stop after 2 rolls. There's no real reason to go a third time, since there's nothing to gain on average. But equally, if you do roll a third time, you're not going to lose anything on average. Personally, I'd stop at 2 rolls here, but what you do, of course, is entirely up to you. The last dice rolling predator is probably the most interesting one in the game, the Philippine Eagle. Now, unlike the brown powers that we've already looked at, this one is a teal power, so it's going to activate once at the end of each round. You'll roll all 5 dice, looking for rats, and you can re-roll any number of dice up to 2 more times each. Then when you stop, if there are at least 3 rats showing, you get to draw 2 new bonus cards and keep 1. Now the strategy with this one is simple. Roll as many times as it takes to try and get those 3 rats. But there's still an important question of probabilities. How likely is this power to succeed and gain that additional bonus card? Well, it's a bit more of a complicated calculation than the others, but this is really where the power of probability reference comes in handy, and we get a final answer of 0.355, so just over 1 in 3 chance. Obviously though, this is a teal power, so you get to use it once at the end of each round, potentially up to 4 times a game if you play it early enough. Now since each use of this power is independent of one another, we can add together the probabilities for each round to get an expected return based on the number of rounds that you use this power, capping out at 1.419 for the full 4 rounds. So on average, we know that for a Philippine Eagle played in round 1, we can expect to gain at least 1 bonus card on average. I think just as interesting though is looking at the breakdown of each outcome, whether that's gaining no bonus card, 1 bonus card, or right the way up to that maximum possibility of 4 bonus cards. What we can see here is that for Philippine Eagle played in round 1, there's actually only a 0.173 chance of getting no bonus cards at all. So most of the time, you're going to get at least 1 bonus card, and in many cases, it's going to be more than 1. We're all going to long for that 1.6% chance of gaining 4. So those are all of the dice rolling predator powers in Wingspan Asia. Now we can take a look at the 2 tucking predator powers available, the Eurasian Eagle Owl and the Eurasian Marsh-Harrier. Strap yourselves in because it is about to get complicated, but I'm going to do my best to guide you through it all. These both have identical powers, similar to the push your luck style dice rolling powers that we looked at before, except now it's looking at cards from the deck instead of rolling dice. In each case you draw up to 3 cards, and when you stop, if their total wingspan is less than 110 centimeters, you get to tuck all of them. If it's 110 or more, you instead discard all of the drawn cards and score 0 points. This brings up very similar questions to before. What is the best strategy here? Should you only draw 1 card each time? Or 2 cards? Or even 3? Is there a way to maximize the number of tucks each time? Does it depend on the cards you've already drawn? Or should you just draw the same number every single time? Again, in order to tackle these types of questions, we have to take a look at some probabilities. Now, one approach could be just to stop at 1 card each time and take that 1 point that you get. There's a 0.849 chance of drawing a card with a wingspan less than 110 centimeters. So that's the probability of success for this strategy. Sounds pretty good, and definitely stronger than the tucking predator powers from the base game, but we could do better. What about if instead we always draw 2 cards and then stop? What does that probability look like? Well, this is a little harder to calculate since it's not just looking at a single card, but now drawing 2 cards and looking at the sum of their wingspans. But this is possible to calculate, and we get an answer of 0.517. So obviously this is lower than before, and it sounds worse at first glance. But remember again, this is the probability of scoring 2 points. So in order to get the expected value, we need to multiply by 2, and we get an answer of 1.034, which is more than the 0.849 that we'd get just drawing 1 card each time. So drawing twice is going to be on average scoring you more points than just drawing once. But we can go one further. What if we draw the full 3 cards? This is an even more complicated calculation with so many more permutations possible. But again, it is possible to calculate, and we get a probability of 0.200 or an expected value of 0.599. Now, even multiplying through to get that expected value, this is a lower number than both of the previous expectations. So drawing 3 cards every single time is the worst strategy of the three. Maybe sometimes it is possible to go too far. So okay then, great. We draw 2 cards every single time, and that's always going to be the best approach, right? Well, maybe not. Picture this scenario. Your first draw is the Northern Harrier, with its wingspan of 109 centimeters. Would you still draw again? You wouldn't, right? Because any bird with a positive wingspan is going to immediately put you over that limit of 110 centimeters, and you'll score 0 points. Conversely, what if your 2 draws are both hummingbirds and you have a total wingspan at less than 20 centimeters? That's still a lot of room before going over that 110 centimeter limit. Would you be tempted to draw again? These might seem like straightforward questions to answer because they're the extreme edge cases, but there are so many different combinations of birds we can draw here that are going to result in any number of possible wingspan sums under 110 centimeters. So how do we know when to stop and when to draw again? Well, thanks again to the Power Probability reference sheet, we know that after 1 card, we should only draw a second if the wingspan is 64 centimeters or under, and after 2 cards, only draw a third if the total wingspan is 39 centimeters or under. In each case, if the wingspan is over this limit, it's just not worth the risk of losing the tucks that you've already gained for that slim potential benefit of tucking an extra card. Now, these 2 numbers to bear in mind, 64 centimeters and 39 centimeters, might just look like they've been plucked out of thin air, but I think there is some intuitive rationale that we can take from this. Firstly, it's quite likely that you're going to draw something under 64 centimeters on that first draw, and in that situation, drawing a second card is going to make the most sense. This aligns with what we already saw earlier, where, on average, drawing twice is going to be better than just drawing once. Equally, once you've drawn twice, you're pretty likely to be over that limit of 39 centimeters anyway, and it's going to be best to stop in most cases. Of course, if you are under that limit, that's where you've got all that wiggle room, and it is going to be worth taking the risk of going for the third tuck. So okay, this strategy is supposedly the best, but how does it compare to what we saw before, where we just draw 2 cards each time and go for those 2 tucks? Well, about 35% of the time, it's going to fail and score 0 points. 19% of the time, though, we're going to stop drawing once and score 1 point. 42% of the time, we stop after drawing twice and score 2 points. And just over 3% of the time, we're going to go and get the maximum of 3 points. In total, these combine together for an expected value of 1.136, which is about 1/10 of a point above the previous strategy. So after all of that, is it worth it? Well, if you can remember these limits, 64 centimeters after 1 draw and 39 centimeters after 2, then in the long run you will score more points on average. So personally, that's what I'll be doing in my own games. But if you're just playing a single game, honestly, you're probably fine to just draw twice every time and take that expected return of still over 1 point and be happy with that. And with that out the way, we have just one final bird to mention, which is the Oriental Bay Owl. Now, this is a round end teal power, which allows you to activate all of the brown predator powers on your board. So obviously this power doesn't come with any kind of specific probability attached to it, but it goes without saying that there's great synergy to be had in combining this bird with any of those that we've talked about today. And being aware of the probabilities of each bird that you've played is going to give you an idea of how many additional points you can expect to score by copying each of them at the round end. One last thing to mention before we wrap up here is the impact of pink powers on these birds. Whether that's a vulture or magpie gaining food when your predator succeeds, or in some of these cases, a snow bunting or European goldfinch gaining a tuck. If your success means your opponent gains a point or a resource, you might want to play things a little bit differently, take more risks, and make sure that you're gaining as many points as possible in each case in order to maximize the point gain relative to your opponents. This may mean rolling more times with a white-throated Kingfisher, or maybe going a little bit more fast and loose when drawing cards on the Eurasian Eagle Owl and Eurasian Marsh-Harrier. Obviously, in each case, the appetite for risk that you have is entirely up to you. So there we have it. That was a comprehensive look at all of the Predator powers in Wingspan Asia, along with each of their associated probabilities and expected values. Hopefully you found that useful, and you can put this knowledge into practice in your next game of Wingspan. If you have any ideas or suggestions for future Wingspan strategy videos, please let me know down in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date with those future releases. Until then, Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again in another video very soon.